Aya, Aya cheke te pewe ne alaka koke, uaha nunge ka kikwe. Peepinšihšia, can everybody hear me? Can I get thumbs up? It's hard to tell. Peepinšihšia wainswane, Nila Myaamia. Hello everyone, I'm Nate Poyfair. I am a project researcher, or project manager and special projects researcher for the Myaami tribe of Oklahoma at the Cultural Resources Office. This is my first time presenting. I know it's the 10th biennial Myaamiaki conference. I'm like to say Bishanewe for everybody showing interest in the tribe. I feel like I'm cutting it out. As I said, I'm a project manager for the Cultural Resources Office. I'm also, as Daryl said, a proud graduate of the Myaamia Center here at Miami University in 2020. One aspect of my job is not only the education of tribal members, but also the continuing self-education. You guys have seen all the presentations today. It's not just as simple as learning your culture and heritage and then that's it. It's a continuation of learning throughout your life. And I'm only 34 years old, so I'm not nearly as smart as a lot of these professors and doctorate people. So anyways, I'd like to start, from the early stages of research into the education of tribal citizens. This process of educating each other has taken decades and decades to develop, decades of combined research and development. And this has resulted in numerous educational tools. If you all have been able to visit our table there on the far right, we have a lot of our publications over there. The Cultural Resources Officer, Julie Olds, likes to use the phrase, knowledge is responsibility, for our tribal educators and researchers to follow. I think this mantra, I like to bring it up every time I do a presentation because it guides the understanding and importance of our revitalization work, as well as the responsibility that we have to protect our nation and strengthen our linguistic and cultural knowledge. As you all saw with the Breath of Life presentations earlier, it's such a fragile frame of work, I guess, or the work that we do is so fragile because it can be lost so easily and it takes so much work to bring it back. So today I'd like to cover the knowledge that is being shared, how we're collecting that knowledge, who's conducting the research, what materials are being used, and what materials are being produced, and finish up with some information on our newest productions, one of them being Shapo Kaione, the Myaamia Portal, and the other one, Myaamia Kilsuke, which is a printed book about the Myaamia moon seasons and years. So moving on to Myaamia knowledge, there's always things in a presentation that make you nervous. This makes me the most nervous to talk about. It's so all-encompassing. I'm sure there's things that I'm going to miss here, so forgive me if I do. Myaamia Nipwayone means Myaamia knowledge, translates to Myaamia knowledge. The question of Myaamia Nipwayone, it revolves around the collective understanding of ourselves as Myaamiaki, or Myaami people. How we eat, how we live, how we celebrate, how we dress, our language, our social practices, etc., are all aspects of Myaamia Nipwayone that have required extensive research and revitalization. That's taken decades, and it will continue to take further decades until I'm sure we have mastered it and revitalized it completely. The cornerstones of a culture are a collective set of beliefs, behaviors, ideas, practices, and most importantly, a common language. The inherent knowledge that our ancestors received from the teachings of community leaders and elders was a long chain of knowledge that was eventually broken through forced removals, the treaty-making periods, and death of elders. Time, I guess took that from our community. Widespread diaspora as well. So the cornerstones of our culture were nearly impossible to maintain due to those factors. As a people living in different places, most notably Indiana, Oklahoma, Kansas, and every other state, maintaining a collective culture proved to be an insurmountable obstacle for Myaamiaki. As this time has moved further from our initial 1846 removal, and the gradual loss of cultural knowledge of fluent speakers dwindled, by the mid-20th century, the Miami tribe was operating almost in complete cultural and linguistic dormancy, outside of, as Daryl mentioned earlier, some very rare household occurrences of language use. Whether we're living in 1694, 1846, or 2024, Myaamia knowledge is every aspect of who we are as a people. Every aspect of our knowledge is a thread in a web of the overall Myaamia culture. Past and present, focusing on the present, Myaamia knowledge is based on a revitalized language and culture, cultural practices, and familial and sometimes regional practices as well. As I stated, we live in a large diaspora. And all of these things have carried through the years of removal and into modern times where communication and collaborative work has become a lot easier. The Miami language was completely dormant, as I referred to earlier, and referred to most, especially government entities, as an extinct language. And in many cases, we were referred to as extinct. But now it's used regularly in Myaamia spaces. We have songs that we can sing. We stomp dance again. My daughter sings songs every day on the way to school in Myaamia Tawenge. And the importance of that, I don't think can be understated. I don't know that some of our elders could have ever imagined a 4-year-old, singing in Myaamia Tawenge 20 or 30 years ago even. And then as you saw with Jared Nally's presentation, and with the work of many others, textiles and various art forms are being developed and made again. Excuse me. Our tribal social norms and practices are being used again, and the list goes on. When preparing the presentation, like I said, this was like the worst slide to prepare because there's so many things to talk about with the overall Myaamia knowledge. But finding it so difficult to explain Myaamia knowledge, I just kept thinking how all-encompassing it really is. I mean, you think about your American culture, your American knowledge, it's everything about you. So everything we do as a community and individually is our knowledge. We continue to develop and evolve as a community. Just like time has changed American culture, it changes us as well. And as a Myaamia person, when I do introspection on my own knowledge and identity, much of my knowledge is what I would explain as like a second generational taught knowledge. I come in the generation following people like Daryl Baldwin, David Costa, George, many others that have spent a lot of time reintroducing the language and culture and history to our community. And as time progresses, our ideals will continue forming our collective thoughts, our social practices, our norms, and our overall identity. Following the trends that have been happening the last 30 years or so, language use will play a significant role in our continued development as a community and forming our identity as well. And then I think this is one of the more complicated aspects of the process of research to household is how do you collect and interpret the knowledge that you're bringing into your community. Lost knowledge is the depletion of inherent and intergenerationally taught knowledge. As shown on the previous slide, lost knowledge is a result of the torn fabrics of our community, whether that be through removals, diaspora, boarding schools, death, or social integration. Collecting and compiling information about our tribal history, especially pre-removal, is particularly challenging due to limited resources and recorded information. And as you saw with Dr. Morrissey and George in the Painted Hide exhibit, we're so reliant on the help of others as well. So, old French documentation of Myaamiaki and Myaamia Tawenge, or the Miami language, is based on French Jesuits and other traders, missionaries, word-of-mouth recollections from other tribal nations. And this is particularly challenging for us due to the fact that we have to interpret what their actual knowledge of Myaamiaki was. Are they talking about us? Are they talking about Anoka or Pewalia people and think they're talking about us? So it's a long process of looking at our resources and our sources and interpreting them and their validity. I like to use an example. There's a guardian angel mission that existed in near present-day Chicago, established by Father Francois Penet in the 1690s. And this village was predominantly occupied by Myaamiaki, and luckily, Penet recorded early Myaamia Tawenge dictionaries. Excuse me. And these recordings have really formed a basis of a lot of our use of the language as well. So with that as an example, a lot of the old accounts and documentation of Myaamiaki and Myaamia ways of life are recorded somewhat in piecemeal form, and we have been able to tie a lot of these small pieces together to form a greater story and an educational foundation. So, and as we are an Algonquian-speaking people, we've also been able to form solidified understandings of cultural practices through our relationships with other tribal nations, the Pewalia, for example. We've done language work with Shawnee neighbors as well. So our language and cultural practices especially have been solidified and bolstered through the use of intertribal relationships. American perception of history can be somewhat warped due to the shortness of our history in general. 1776 is the beginning of a lot of people's perception of time. But our removal was in 1846, and it's such a short time ago compared to how long we existed as a people. And as many have been trained to believe, it's a really long time ago. And to us, it's not. I mean, we're just a few generations removed from grandmothers and grandfathers and great-grandfathers that had no knowledge of their language and culture due to boarding schools and removal diaspora, et cetera. And I would like to note, it's important to note that the written records of Myaamiaki simply do not exist before pre-removal outside of the perspective of French traders and missionaries, et cetera, because we didn't have a written language. So it's particularly challenging. Luckily, not for me. Daryl and David have to deal with the language work, but because of this, our research goes through a long process of verifying and checking validity of sources and things like that. So the process of conducting historical research contains multiple steps. We begin with identifying our questions, what we want to learn about ourselves, aka finger weaving or language or what have you. And we begin with identifying our questions and what current literature exists about said topics. Then we collect primary and secondary sources, such as archival records, genealogical information, maps, journals, artifacts, and much more. Our once collected, the validity and reliability of such sources is analyzed. Sometimes, something may be labeled as Myaamiaki in an archive, but in reality, it's perhaps Shawnee or Wyandotte. Another nation. So, if the sources and information we find are considered valid, then we move towards organization of the information and addition of such information into our collective story that we've been continuously forming for the last 30 or 40 years. Due to the massive human loss and catastrophic treaty and removal periods, physical artifacts, as you all have seen today with the Painted Hides exhibit and with some of Jared Nally's presentation, they're much harder to come by. They don't survive hundreds of miles of removal, death, 2 removals, and so having these physical artifacts has been much more challenging to come by. So having the relationship with Musée de Quai Branly, for example, is just so valuable to us. We're able to hold things that we actually made, and they're not replicas or something from another tribal nation. When you really think about it, every lost item destroys a story. So when you only have 10 items, as valuable as they are, you lose so much with the thousands of others that have been lost over the years. So that's a huge obstacle in our collecting the, lost knowledge that we have with art and textiles. And the small number of artifacts that have become the framework of our communal understanding of art, symbolism, and cultural practices and beliefs have been so instrumental in us reforming our artistic and just textile-based work. And the process of regaining this lost knowledge is that of continued research in intertribal relationships. I think that's really important to emphasize. I'll probably emphasize it a few times, but having Shawnee neighbors, Pewalia neighbors that are so eager to work with us. We learn from them, they learn from us. And then there's trips to the National Archives, work with the National Breath of Life with Dr. Baez and Jerome Viles. Museum visits, shared knowledge with related communities, as I said, and many other aspects of learning have been utilized to create an understanding we have of ourselves and our ancestors. And then as a community, we are tasked with doing this continuous research to relearn the forgotten knowledge. I feel like I repeat knowledge so many times in this, but you think about if there's someone in your family that knows everything about your family history, and you lose them before recording it, it's like that, but exponentially more. So I think that's really important to use that metaphor. I like to think of that a lot, as just how impactful it was over the last 150 years following removal. I'd like to preface this. A lot of the people that I'm going to highlight here are people that I know personally and have worked with. There's a lot of people left out of this. This is a fraction of the people that have done the collective research. But I'd like to start, to get to where we're at today. This is the 10th Biennial Myaamiaki Conference, celebrating a reinvigorated tribal community. Decades of combined research and work are required. Dozens of tribal members, Myaamia Center, and Miami Tribe of Oklahoma employees, and many scholars have worked tirelessly over the last few decades to recollect lost knowledge that our community once held. Language work done by Dr. David Costa and Daryl Baldwin, and now Jared Baldwin and Hunter Thompson Lockwood is being used to reintroduce and teach Myaamia Tawenge to our tribal citizens. George Ironstrack, Diane Hunter, Dr. Cam Shriver, and many others have worked to educate our community on the history of our nation, to fill the historical gaps that we've lost, which has also resulted in the creation expansion of our community blog, Achimotatiangwe and Achimwakiangonje, Stories from the Land website. Graduate student research as well, as you saw with Jared and Allie's presentation. There's other graduate students too that have done extensive work to contribute to the growing collective knowledge. Because the Myaamia Center has become a center for learning for Myaamia people, this research has resulted in countless others contributing over the years, as I stated, so I don't want to leave anybody's name out, but there's so many. It is important to note that a lot of this research would not be possible without the important relationships that are formed with the universities, Miami University for one, museums, national parks, and scholars throughout the United States, and in some cases outside of the United States, as you saw with the Musée de Quai Branly. And as you saw earlier, when Dr. Morrissey, who's from the University of Illinois, has contributed greatly in our Painted Hides workshops. Jeremy Turner's here. I'm going to call him out. Wave your hand, Jeremy. He's done a lot of work with us hands-on in teaching us about brain tanning of hides. And these relationships, it takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of time. People drive 10 hours to Oklahoma to teach, brain tanning and various other forms or traditional forms of either artwork or daily life. It goes without saying how much time and effort it takes to truly revitalize that. And once again, I'll start with this. This is a small sample size of what's been produced, but I'd like to go through a few of the things that have been produced resulting from the research of the Myaamia Center and in some ways the Miami Tribe Cultural Resources Office. Following the process of collecting and sorting research, as I just showed and talked about, the Myaamia Center and Miami Tribe have developed a variety of educational tools, various curriculum, for educational programs, published materials, internet and web-based tools, educational tools and educational videos and CDs, and curriculum for educational programming that has resulted from the collective research of these aforementioned centers for learning. The revitalization of Myaamia Tawenge has resulted in language-based publications such as the Myaamia Paywalia Dictionary or the Miami, Illinois Dictionary, and phrases and greeting books that also contain language. This research has been implemented in the curriculum of educational programs such as summer camp programming, which I'll get into here in a little bit. But the continued growth of our language use within our community is the result of a lot of these educational programs and resources. Educational research has led, or historical research, excuse me, has led to the publication and dissemination of various materials. We have an allotment book, a removal book, and a lot of historical information on our community blog. The Earth and Sky curriculum on traditional ecological perspectives and the Myaamia storybook educate our community on traditional worldviews of Myaamiaki. Web-based tools such as the websites that I've mentioned and the apps have also been used for the outreach and education of Myaamiaki. Language learning app, the ILDA dictionary, and I believe there's a table back there for the dictionary if you all are interested. And then secondary language learning apps as well. I know that we have a course on Memrise, but I think Memrise is being deleted. It's being deleted. Yep. Okay. So that won't exist anymore. But you know, as an example, it's been used. You know, people live in diaspora. People live far away from each other, and these tools have been instrumental in the language learning. Websites, I mentioned Achimo Tatiangwe earlier, the Myaamia blog, Achimwakiang Gonje, which is Stories from the Land, Kakisatungia, the Myaamia Digital Archive. Megan is here somewhere. There she is. Ask her about Kakisatungia, the Myaamia Digital Archive, and then Makikwia, Myaamia Ethnobotanical Database, which was in part created by Mike Ganella. They've all been developed to record the results of their research, and these have the intent of educating the community members on Myaamia history, worldview, through the in-home learning environments that, especially post-COVID, are somewhat required for most people. Through the Myaamia blog, users are able to learn about Myaamia history, Myaamia ecological perspectives, our lunar calendar, current events and research, and other topics, whatever they may be, current events. The virtual library also provides printable resources for in-home learning. Achimwakiang Gonje, and I'll just quote, aims to help us understand and in turn tell the history of complex legal patchwork that has come to define Myaamiange, the land of the Miamis. And this website, in part created by Shriver and Dr. Shriver and others, contains information on the events, people, and places within Myaamiange, so the traditional homelands and current homelands of the Miami tribe of Oklahoma, with interactive searches and maps. It's one of my favorite things to use if anybody's interested. You can see where people have lived, you can see what treaties have impacted land ownership and different things like that. Kakisatungia is the digital archive, which plays a big role in my current position with the tribe. It enables tribal members to access Myaamia heritage, such as museum collections and scanned documents, archival and historical documents. And then I'd like to touch just a little bit on the curriculum and educational programs that have led our summer youth programming. We currently have 6 themes that exist in our youth programming, one of them being song and dance, the second one being living on the land, family, earth and sky, games, and homes. These 6 various themes are rotated through different cycles, and we have 4 different groups within our camps, one of them being A1 Zapata, which is for the ages 10 to 16. This was formed in 2005 as an overnight camp and then moved to strictly a day camp, Monday through Friday format for 1 week in 2011. Sakachueta for 6 to 9 year olds. I worked extensively in Sakachueta, and it's for 6 to 9 year olds, and that began in 2015. Myaamiaki is for a little bit older. It's for 17 and 18 year olds. This is post A1 Zapata, pre-college education, and it's a little more individualized learning. And that began in 2021. Nesapata evolved from a parent-guardian orientation day camp to a full camp in 2023, and that is for kids pre 6 years old, so 5 and under. In terms of outcomes, I'm going to quote Christina Fox on this. Tina Fox, and the results of these, she says, are we're consistently seeing youth feeling more connected to the community after participating in camp, and they all report having fun. Parents feel like their children are meeting the goals that parents have for camp. The youth also say it's important to know language and are excited to share what they have learned with others. I think that's instrumental in the continuation of a lot of the work that I've talked about. And then a brief reflection. I mentioned that I worked in A1 Zapata and Sakachueta as a counselor. Every year there's the continuing feeling as the camp goes on that a lot of our tribal youth by day 3 and day 4 are using the language more. They're feeling more and more comfortable. And I think everything that we're doing as a community education-wise kind of centers on this, and it's exactly what we want. So I'm going to move and give you guys a couple examples of, these are actually up there on the top left. That is our community blog that I mentioned earlier that has a wide range of historical research, resources and documents and articles, and then below it is the Stories from the Land website I mentioned. And then there on the right is kind of, it's what we have over at our table now, but it's the wide array of resources and printed materials that we've created over the years. And then I'd like to go in depth a little bit on Shapokaione, the Myaamia portal. The newest website created by the Miami tribe. This is entirely used to enhance distance learning materials and opportunities for tribal members. This portal will be instrumental. This website will be instrumental in providing Myaamiaki with courses, typically only accessible through in-person learning. Most notably language courses. All things related to Myaamia knowledge will be put here. It'll be similar to the blog in some ways, except it'll have more interactive courses. The primary goal of this resource is to provide equal learning opportunities to all tribal households and locations, regardless of where people are located. Just requires internet access. This has become a method to compile all of the resources that I've gone over, and it combats one of the biggest obstacles, as I've mentioned, which is the extreme widespread diaspora that we suffer as a nation. The website has a feature for tribal members and non-tribal members to create an account, and by creating an account, you have access to various learning courses, and future courses will be available as well. For non-tribal members, there's only, I believe, one course, and that's for career development for K through 12 teachers. But for tribal members, we have 6 courses now. I think the most used one would be the Myaamia Tawenge 101, which is our language learning. But there will be more in the future, and as of now, I don't think it's set up, correct me if I'm wrong, Tina, but we will have expanded resources and feedback for community members as well. As of now, it's more of a self-learning course, but there should be set up in the future for feedback and grading. And I should note these courses are set up for at your own pace learning. You know, as we all know, as life goes by, some people can spend 2 hours one night and not work on it again for another week. So it's really useful in that way as well. And then the future plans for the portal. I think Tina in the back, she can. Tina, wave your hand. I don't know if anybody sees her. Make sure you go over there. She'll be able to tell you a lot more. She leads a lot of the project work on this, but there'll be more course options, and as I said, grading and feedback as well. And then I do believe has tentative plans for a Zoom class in the future. And then a brief reflection. I use the Myaamia Tawenge 101 course, and I feel like I'm fairly well versed, but for at-home learning, it's one of the best resources I've used. So I think they've done a really good job on the portal. And then this is our newest publication. This is something that I've worked on personally, and Madeline Richardson has as well. She's hiding in the corner over there. But this is a printed resource that we created. It'll eventually be available as an interactive course on the portal. But right now, we printed, I believe, 3,500 copies of this. And this entire project was funded by ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act. I think many tribes, if not all tribes, have benefited greatly from this, but it was a stimulus package put together for tribes to enhance distance learning opportunities. So that was our main focus here, was creating a printed material that we could send to all tribal members at no cost, for them to learn about ecological perspectives, connect with their lunar calendar that they receive every year. And the ARPA Nujunge team, which I'm the project manager for, Madeline, has done a lot of the design work. This book contains, I believe, 100 pages, 102 pages, 100 pages. And it contains information and ecological perspectives throughout the entire lunar calendar year, which, just to backtrack, Myaamia people, Myaamiaki, their worldview is of a lunar calendar perspective, not the Gregorian calendar. Our perspective, I should say. So every year, I'd like to backtrack a little bit. Every year, tribal citizens, every tribal household receives a Myaamia lunar calendar, a Myaamia calendar that uses tribal language, and it educates people on the different Myaamia months, seasons, and transitional periods. And we came to the idea, kind of a collective idea, that it would be nice for people to have a much more detailed resource to go along with that people could reference, kind of set on their coffee table, and as time goes by, read through it. The ARPA team, Madeline and myself, and various Myaamia Center staff developed the plan to create this publication. And I believe it took just under 13 months from start to finish. And as I said, we printed 3,500 copies, and we sent out 3,242 free copies to households. So I believe we're around 7,000 tribal members. Tara knows. 7,000? 7,109. So just under one per every two people. So I think that's something that we're really, really proud of. Every single household got a free resource to reference and learn. That's a big thing. I mentioned that earlier, that the cost of travel for people to come visit, the cost for people to go to a university and learn. This is a free resource, and I think it's something that it's one of the most proud moments, I think, of both Madeline and I's career with the tribe. The early stages of this project were to plan the creation of a resource that could be kind of used to teach households how to follow along with the tribal calendar, as I mentioned. But this book contains the work and time of 25 or more people. You talk about the historical work that stems from Tina Fox's graduate work, George Einstrack. A lot of the stuff we used was from the tribal blog that he's done. And the graduate and thesis work of Mike Ganella and Joshua Sutterfield. And then further compiling of information done by our ARPA team was based on various historians' work as well. So Photography in the book. Hopefully you all will go over there and see it. It's a really beautiful book. It contains photos from Karen Baldwin and Doug Bakongi, who both are employees of the Cultural Resources Office, and Madeline Richardson and Myaamia Center staff member Jonathan Fox. Megan Sekulich and Madeline Richardson both contributed in various ways to the artistic and symbology-related aspects of the book, with Madeline being a source of the graphic design for the entire book. So when you go over there and look at it, it's really pretty. She's gonna get embarrassed, but like, she made it pretty, not me. I don't do any of that. So most importantly, Myaamia Tawenge used throughout the book is used to enhance readers. Sometimes it's just comfortability, looking at a word over and over. But also we included a glossary as well for definitions and side-by-side learning. And then, as I mentioned, I think it's really important to note, you're talking 20 or 25 people with decades of research went into this book. And we were just merely a team of two compiling that information and working together to get this resource out. And then I'd like to finish. It'll take a second, but knowledge is responsibility is a big phrase that we use at the Cultural Resources Office. But I'd like to also go over a couple of my favorite phrases that I think really encompass everything we're doing here. The first one is by Mildred Walker, and it is Pilwije Pembaliangwe Ileje Ekwa Mamawe Epiangwe, and that is, we've traveled far, but we're still together. And if you sit on that, the meaning, it can have many meanings, but I think most importantly, if you look at what we have here today, nothing could encompass what we're doing today at the Myaamiaki conference better than that. And the suffering and I guess our of Native people in this country, I think that phrase, to me, encompasses everything for our tribe. And then Uaha Myaamia Tawenge. Let's all do it together. Uaha Myaamia Tawenge. And that means Myaamia is spoken here. And I'm not gonna go any further than that, because if you don't understand the significance of you saying that in this location, I think we've all failed as presenters. So. Now that the language is back and it's not just a memory, I think both phrases, symbolize the hard work and dedication of people before me, of course, and the Myaamia Center specifically. And then I think I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the Breath of Life participation in this. There's a few members here in the front, and I think. Daryl mentioned Napwandingi, learning from each other. We learn from each other as tribal citizens, but it's a collective effort. We've got a Shawnee tribal member here. Jeremy's a Shawnee tribal member. Other tribes have contributed greatly in this work. I mean, you need friends in the world of revitalization, and I think it's really important to acknowledge that it's not just you all learning from us. We've taken so much from our neighbors and our relatives, especially as Shawnee and Peoria. And I'll say this one more time, just so I'm not yelled at. I'm a little afraid, actually, that somebody's going to come up and say, you didn't talk about me, but there's so many people involved in this. I've been a catalyst. I've put together a printed resource, but outside of me putting it together, this was the blood, sweat, and tears of so many tribal members. And I think that's it. So I'd like to kind of end with a Mishinewe and Napwandingi, learning from each other. I think is the main phrase that I've been saying to myself all week. I think this has been a true gift to learn with the Breath of Life folks and everybody else who's been here. So Mishinewe.